All right, we are going to kick things off. Firstly, I'd like to welcome everyone. This is our first of our roundtable series. My name is Jonathan Deeg. I'm the Managing Director here at the Deeg Group. And over the last really month of this second lockdown here in Melbourne, we've just been talking and throwing around a few ideas of how we might be able to get out and really trying to assist our clients right across the board, from our APSO clients, our Melbourne commercial clients, some of our larger tenants, right across the board, both here in Victoria, but then also in Adelaide and Brisbane. I saw we have some attendees today from both Adelaide and Brisbane, so welcome. But we're going to do a 6-part series. We've got some fantastic speakers who will be joining us, and I'm going to introduce you to Ben McMillan in a second. But we will be doing some talks around how we can sort of work our way through this COVID period, coming out in a better position. We've got some great insights into business performance, workplace wellness, and I think through our friends at Croc Media, we've even got a bit of sport and AFL content as well to bring to you. So we're excited to be doing it. In some pretty strange times right across the boards that this is how communication is being done. But I think our first presenter, Ben McMillan, will be able to give us some great insights into the media and into the world of podcasting. So Ben is actually the head of digital audio at Nova. Ben's has spent a lot of time in the media industry. He's worked for the BBC. He's worked for Pacific magazines. And for the last 7 years, he's been at Nova. So it's great to have him on board, and he's going to give us some insights, into the growth of podcasting and different content trends that have been happening through this COVID period. So we welcome you all, and we hope you can join us each week. But Ben, I'm going to hand over to you.
Great. Thanks, Jono. I will just share my presentation and then we'll kick off. And can I just check, Christina, that that's appearing on your screen in full screen? I think you might be on mute, so hoping that's all right.
Yeah, sorry, all good.
Great, thanks. Well, yeah, thanks, Jono, and thanks to everyone who has tuned in. It's always a little awkward in these forums where you can't see anyone and you can't read the body language and not sure if your audience is enjoying the content, but I thought perhaps it's the perfect environment for me to get into the psyche of our podcasters who have a similar relationship with their audience, although they've got the benefit of some post-production, which I don't have that luxury today. But this roundtable is all about podcasting, the growth of this new or arguably established medium, and the current trends we're experiencing during lockdown, which very much are going against the grain of a lot of other media. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about podcasting from a radio station perspective, because that's where I am at the moment, Nova Entertainment. We'll talk about the definition of podcasts and what they are, a short history of their journey, the growth of podcasting, some trends that have happened over the past few years, but then specifically about what's happened from a content perspective during lockdown. We'll look at podcasting for brands. I understand there's a few marketers on the line as well, so just a little bit on that for you. And then some recommendations for listening. So just some of the top picks at the moment that's trending, or that are personal recommendations from me for you all. So I thought I'd start with the business I represent, Nova Entertainment, and most of you would know Nova as the radio station, or Nova and Smooth FM if you're a media junkie. And whilst broadcast radio is still very much at the heart of what we do, we have evolved as a business to meet the changing media habits and consumption habits of our audience over the years. So that started really with the digitalization of our products and the build of the websites, the social extensions. We built an experiential arm of the business, which was all around live music and brand experiences. And then a few years ago, we launched an in-store digital radio station for Coles. So that now runs in every or over 800 of the Coles stores nationwide. But we're here to talk about digital audio, and more specifically podcasting, And that really came about, we noticed a few years ago that the younger generation, while we had more of them coming in and listening to radio, they weren't spending as much time listening. And our insights told us that this audience specifically wanted everything on demand. So they wanted to listen to what they want, when they want, where they want, and on what device they want. So podcasting was the perfect audio evolution for us as a business. And in 2017, we invested in a partnership with a company called Acast, and they are a podcast technology company born out of Sweden. And we launched the podcast arm of our business, and it's now the fastest growing content and the fastest growing revenue arm of our business. So about a third of Australians now listen to podcasts. And when we drill down to probably more the people on this call, so business owners, business decision makers, entrepreneurs, they're more likely to listen to podcasts. So I'm going to assume that probably nearly half of you listen to podcasts, and probably about half don't, or are just wondering what I'm talking about. So I thought I'd start with this great definition. It's not the Oxford Dictionary definition, although podcasts was word of the year for the American Oxford Dictionary in 2005, and it beat out bird flu and life hack for word of the year. So some tough competition. Anyway, the quote is that podcasts are all of your favorite blogs, shows, and topics, some you didn't even know you'd enjoy, wrapped up in a huge hub of recordings that you can explore, download, and listen to on your own time, in the car, at work, at home, working out, anywhere. If you can Google it, there's probably a podcast about it. And there's now over 800,000 podcasts in the world and about 54 million podcast episodes. But before we talk about that, I thought we'd talk about a brief history of podcasts. So podcasts launched nearly 20 years ago, back in 2003, but they only really sort of flourished and became mainstream in the past 3 to 5 years. And the word podcast was actually coined in 2004, and it was bringing together the words iPod and being on demand, and cast from the word broadcast. Then in 2005, Apple bundled podcasts into their iTunes app, but in 2012, they included the standalone app. And that's really helped the discovery of podcasts for all Apple iPhone users, which is obviously huge in this country, and also supported the shift from podcasts being indie and niche to becoming mainstream. In 2014, the podcast Serial was released and became a global phenomenon. If you haven't listened to it, it is a great one. And it really became the gateway for many people entering the world of podcasting. As a business for us, Nova Entertainment, we launched in 2017 our podcast division. And off the back of that, the next year, News Corp launched Newscast. And that same year, they launched a podcast called The Teacher's Pet by Hedley Thomas, who's one of the journalists for The Australian. And that's about the investigation into the disappearance and unsolved case of Lynn Dawson, who went missing back in 1982. And that podcast had over 50 million listens worldwide and resulted in the arrest of Lynn's ex-husband 37 years after her disappearance. And that's still going on at the moment, that case. Last year, Netflix turned the popular podcast Dirty John into a Netflix miniseries, and Spotify announced an investment of $500 million into acquiring podcast content. So we can certainly say the last year has been huge in podcasting. And in 2020, the year that brings us a lot of surprises, to say the least, we're not surprised about the continued rise of audio. And with the recent lockdowns and working from home, smart speaker sales have continued to rise. The consumption's been exponential, with people engaging with their audio devices at home more and more. And brands are starting to understand the equal importance of having an audio identity as well as a visual. So when you think of brands like McDonald's, the Netflix, Sonic Trigger, and Bunnings Warehouse jingles, they've all got really strong audio cues, and we're starting to see more and more brands move into that space and have a focus on it. And then we've got the explosion of podcasts, both in listens and in revenue. So you can see here the graphs with the color on it just shows the listens that we had on our network for podcasts over the last 3 years. So in June 2018, we only had 6.7 million listens for the month. That tripled last year, and then it's gone up again to 27 million listens in June of this year. And so we can also see underneath that is the graph of investment into podcasting in this country. This was a forecast that was done by PwC before COVID hit. But our projections at the moment and the revenue we're experiencing is pretty much on track with that. So we're up about 86% year on year this year to date. And that's sort of what PwC had predicted. And we had 100% growth last year, so ahead of what PwC had predicted. But we're seeing this new medium is probably going to be about $110 million advertising industry in this market by 2022. In terms of the content that people are listening to, it's really varied, as you can see here. But comedy and news are pretty much the main ones that come up here. Comedy often an easy way in and a really broad category. But news and current affairs is an easy one for people to keep up to date. Those that don't have time to read the website or read the paper, you can get your daily news fixed from a podcast through your Google Home, through your mobile, on the way to work, through your car with integrated devices. So you can see it's pretty varied there, the listens. That's really because people are listening to multiple genres across the week that tap into different passion points they have. We see a lot of people come into like comedy and news and music as well. And then as they become more of an established podcast listener, we see their habits start to diversify. So when we look at what's happened to listening over the past few months as we've gone into lockdown, there's been a real shift into education, self-empowerment, health and wellness has been huge. We've seen decreases in sport and travel, as you'd expect, although sports pretty much bounced back to where it was pre-COVID as the AFL and NRL have sort of restarted their seasons. We've seen the numbers bounce back. But there's definitely been a shift. People first going to news, wanting to know what's going on, getting your updates, and then starting to go into like parenting content. How do I homeschool my kids, or some health and well-being. There's a lot of podcasts around mindfulness, meditation, resilience. And we're seeing really big growth in that category as well. And another reason for a lot of this growth in some of these categories is that with audio, you're able to shift your conversation and your content really quickly. So just got a couple of examples here of a couple of podcasts that adapted their content really quickly. So the first one is the Nitty Gritty Committee with Michelle Laurie, sort of a bit of a media personality, who's been around for quite a while. And her podcast is usually interviews with people that she finds interesting and just sort of going deep into finding a bit more about who they are. And she shifted her podcast to be called Welcome to Hell during lockdown. And that was because she was living with her mum. She was trying to homeschool her 2 kids and run a successful full-time career. So she talks in her podcast really openly about what it's like trying to be that everyone to everything. And a lot of people came to it just for that, wanting to hear that someone else was going through the same things they were. And she talks about wanting to sometimes just sort of run away from her kids and go hide in the shed and have a gin and tonic. And I'm sure a lot of people on the call probably had that moment as well. And then there was How I Work, which is a podcast with an organizational psychologist who interviews business leaders about how they go about their day and why they are able to get more out of their day than other people, and why they've been so successful when they've still got the same amount of hours in the day. And so that podcast went from being a weekly podcast about how I work to a daily podcast about how I work from home, and giving tips and tricks about how to get the most out of your workday when you're in a new environment with different surroundings. Then we also saw a lot of podcasters launch new content, particularly news. So the ABC launched a podcast called CoronaCast, where it had an interview with a doctor every morning. It's still live at the moment if you want to listen. And it just gave you 15-minute updates in the morning about what was happening in Australia with CoronaCast. What are they projecting, and what can you do to stay safe? On the flip side of that, you had people who were like, I've had enough news content. I've heard enough about coronavirus. And so we saw the launch of a podcast called The Chaser Report, which was a very much satirical take on the news, and as you'd expect from The Chaser, just taking the piss out of what was happening in the real news and giving you a lighter take on that. So check that out if you've had enough of the COVID talk and you want a bit of something more engaging. For brands, in terms of how you can get involved in podcasts, the first most obvious one really is that you can create your own podcast. It's pretty inexpensive to do compared to other assets that you can build. And you can build a really great loyal audience and really build your brand in that space. The challenges around that are you need to build something that a listener wants to go and listen to, not just you talking about your brand. So We've seen some really successful ones, one in particular for an IVF clinic called Janaea, who the content they spoke about, it's a topic that's quite private and that people did want to listen on their own, and podcasts are perfect for that. You've got your headphones in, you listen on your own 90% of the time, and you can deep dive on a particular topic. So Janaea created a podcast with us, interviewing doctors about the process, what you can expect, what you go through, and just gave her a deeper insight into, if you do want to go down this journey, what does that entail for you? We got a really great response. It was Podcast of the Year in 2017, I think it was. And off the back of that, they got a lot of feedback from listeners saying they loved it, but they also want to know what's the personal journey that people go through and what's it like, on the other side of the fence. So season 2 was all about interviewing people who'd gone through that journey and their experience, the highs and the lows, and just some, more the emotional side of what you go through. So there are some great examples of brands building their own podcasts, but the main way brands come in is to use host read sponsorships or ad spots. So you can go into a podcast that's already established, got a big audience, and it's got a notable talent that you want to align with, and that talent will deliver your brand message in their own words to their loyal following, and that usually has the most impact. You can also just buy ads. If you've got a 30 or a 15-second audio ad, you can just run that across a whole collection of podcasts to reach a broad audience. So I haven't really gone into a lot of detail there, but if there is interest from anyone who wants to know more about podcast advertising, please reach out and we can certainly help you there. I thought it'd be good to look at a case study of what a client has done in this space and how it's worked for them. I've chosen Beyond Blue. This is one of the most successful campaigns we've run. We actually ran it before COVID, so it's probably quite timely to run a campaign like that. And then they've, off the back of this campaign, Beyond Blue have launched their own podcast, a space for people to come and hear more where they can be alone and just listen to the message in an environment that suits them. So I'll play this video. I'm just going to make sure I've got audio on because that's a common fail here. I'll be 2 seconds.
Anxiety is the most common mental health condition in Australia. On average, 1 in 4 people, that's 1 in 3 women and 1 in 5 men, will experience anxiety at some stage in their life. There are many ways to manage this, and the sooner people get support, the more likely they are to recover. Beyond Blue wanted to encourage support-seeking behaviour and direct people to get the help they need from their local GP or other services, including the Beyond Blue website. They wanted to drive the message in a way that was conversational and motivating, like talking to a friend, and would inspire change in people's lives. Podcasting was uniquely positioned to help start this conversation. Podcasts provide intimate one-to-one listening occasions where people listen with intent, usually alone and usually through headphones. Listeners actively choose the content they are most interested in, which means they have undivided attention and are deeply engaged when listening. Not only that, 61% of listeners take action after hearing a podcast message, which made this a compelling platform for Beyond Blue. As Australia's largest audio marketplace, Nova Entertainment could offer access to a range of podcast collections and content creators, which would give Beyond Blue a unique voice in a safe space. We identified podcast collections that people seek out when they might be feeling low or looking for ways to help themselves, and surrounded these with the Beyond Blue message.
Having a laugh is one of the greatest ways to relieve stress. You've come to the right podcast. But if you find those feelings just aren't going away, no matter how funny this is, then it's time to cut the jokes. It could be anxiety, a long run, a gym session, a brisk walk, All perfect ways to relieve stress. But what if it's more than stress?
Podcast hosts have strong and trusting relationships with their audience. A selection of hosts got behind the Beyond Blue campaign and shared their own stories, which normalised the idea about talking openly about mental health and gave the audience permission to start talking too.
If you like hearing about how your failures can shape your dreams, well, this is the perfect podcast for you. But if you're having trouble dreaming or sleeping for that matter, it could also be a sign of anxiety.
While the partnership drove traffic to the Beyond Blue website, it ultimately delivered more than ROI for Beyond Blue. The campaign tapped into a universal point of connection and saw immediate response by the community at large, from podcast hosts and their audiences, staff and friends who heard the campaign. Through the power of audio, we inspired positive action and started this important conversation on a national scale.
Hopefully that gave some inspiration if you are looking at any podcast advertising. But yeah, really nice campaign. One that did jump out to me there was The Art of Decluttering, is one of the podcasts on our network. So if you are stuck in lockdown and want to declutter your house, there's a podcast for you. But I thought we'd just finish with some recommendations, just some personal recommendations I think a lot of people will like, or that are really relevant right now. So the first one is a podcast called The Night Driver. This is the follow-up podcast from Hedley Thomas, so the creator of The Teacher's Pet. It only launched on Monday and it launched at #1 on the charts. It will be the biggest podcast this year. I think it's going to be about 10-part series and they're releasing one episode a week. So episode 1 is out now. If you are a subscriber to The Australian, I think there's 3 episodes out. And it's about an hour long each episode. So if you're 1 hour walk in Victoria when you can leave your house, that's a nice one to take with you on the walk. It's really well produced. It's interesting content and hopefully it drives another outcome through some great investigative journalism. The second one, How I Work, I mentioned this before. It's all tips and tricks from the world's best innovators. It's by an organizational psychologist, Amantha, and she interviews people who have just, made the most out of their career by being really smart in the way they manage their time, in the way they, do what they do. And the last one is How I Built This. It's not on our network, but a great podcast. And it weaves the narrative journey about innovators, entrepreneurs and idealists and the movements they've built. So it's got the founder of Wikipedia. There's an episode with the founder of the Bumble and Airbnb. And they've just recently adapted their content to run a How I Built This resilience series. So if that's something that you're interested in and want to hear more and get some more tips around that space, it's a great one either for yourself or to recommend to your staff. So they're my 3 top tip recommendations at the moment, although I just did stumble across another one the other day, which is a Harry Potter podcast if you're stuck in the home with your family. And it's like an audio book, but in a podcast series, and each chapter of the book is read out by a different celebrity. Chapter 1 is read out by Daniel Radcliffe himself. So if you're looking for something to occupy the kids, that might be a good one. That's pretty much it from me. I might just have a look. If anyone has any questions, feel free to put them into the chat panel. I'm happy to answer questions. But I think I nearly took up that full half hour of your day. So if there's no questions, I'll just say thanks for your time today. Appreciate you joining. Hopefully you either learned something about podcasts or got a good recommendation that you can take with you on your walk or your time away from work. But thanks very much, everyone, and hope you have a great afternoon. See you later. sorry, it just cut out there for a minute. Christina, were there any questions that came through?
Not from what I can see. No.
No worries.
Perfect. I think we might wrap that up.
All right, great. Thanks for that.
Thanks, Ben.
Enjoy the rest of the series.